Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, it's your favorite history teacher back at you again with another historical video. Today, we got a big chapter to talk about today, and that's chapter 20. Excuse me. That's chapter 20 in your textbook, titled The Progressives. The Progressive Movement, Progressive Era begins. So let's get into it. Here you go. Chapter 20. So only 12 more chapters left to go. We're nearing the end. Anyways, let's get into it. Okay. Woo, boy. Yeah, so this is kind of an important, a very important chapter, because a lot of, well, just think about it. Think of the name progressive, not the car insurance, but think of this word, progressive, progressivism, progress. All right. We turn into the 20th century, and now we're progressing as a nation. And who are the progressives? Well, they're mostly middle class, city dwellers, women. Okay, their goals are direct, purposeful human intervention in social and economic affairs. Okay, no longer are they going to be bullied around. They're going to try and actually make change in society. Again, progress. You're going to be hearing me say that a lot. The goals also were to regulate and or break up trusts. Okay, that economic affairs piece, and they did so through the words, the pictures, the photos, the books of muckrakers. And muckrakers are journalists who attempted to expose the evils of society and corruption. So some famous muckrakers you should know are Ida Tarbell, and she published devastating writings about the Standard Oil Company. Lincoln Steffens, he wrote The Shame of the Cities, and in it he talks about the corruption of municipal city governments. Of course, you can't talk about muckraking without Upton Sinclair and his book, The Jungle, which, as we talked about in the last lecture, led to the Meat Inspection Act. And you also have this guy named David G. Phillips writing The Treason of the Senate. Okay, another big idea in the progressive era is the social gospel movement, which is about a powerful movement among Protestants, and their goal was to improve the cities, improve the communities. Okay, again, improvement, progress, going forward. Okay, they probably felt that there was this stagnation in society, corruption and scandal, and just, not a lot of change going on. So here's Ida Tarbell front and center. You have that Steffens guy right here. And then McClure's Magazine, all about Standard Oil. Okay, another muckraker you have to know, and we talked about him too in the last lecture, Jacob Reese, in his book, How the Other Half Lives. He was also a photographer, and he will photograph the poor and immigrant living conditions and really show the world, really show the United States, like, wow, that's bad. So yeah, you need to know him and his book. Settlement houses are a big thing that pop up during this time, and they would help poor women, immigrants, and children adjust to American life. One of the more famous settlement houses in American history was owned by Jane Addams, called the Hull House in Chicago. And she will help inspire the social work profession for many ladies and young women to go into. There are also new reforms for other professions. You have the American Medical Association, AMA. States are going to establish bar associations for not alcohol, the bar for lawyers, as well as the National Farm Bureau Federation for farmers. And women often were excluded from most of these professions. That's why a lot of them go into settlement houses, teaching, or this, or more social work opportunities, nurses. Okay. Why can't I remember that person's? That's Jacob Reese. Ugh, I couldn't think of his name. Jacob Reese. All right. Women and reform. So single women played a large role in reform movements. The temperance movement from, the 19th century. Yeah. And the settlement houses. There are also women's clubs popping up. And obviously these are organizations for women to meet. They're going to plant trees, support schools, clean up the communities. They will also help pass state and federal child labor laws because child labor was still a thing in the early 1900s, as well as these dry laws, and that's in regarding temperance and alcoholism dry laws. So suffrage for women, remember, suffrage means the right to vote. So suffrage for women, right to vote for women. This movement gained momentum when suffragists argued separate spheres would not be changed because people thought if women got the vote, they would start to act like men. And the temperance movement favored suffrage. Because women kind of led the temperance movement. So suffrage, it's basically the women's rights movement, right? But as we know, women didn't get the right to vote until 1920 with the passage of the 19th Amendment. So they're going to have to go another 20 years in this new century until they get the right to vote. A big woman to know, a big notable person from the women's suffrage movement is Alice Paul, kind of seen as a radical for her time. She's going to advocate heavily for women's suffrage. And she was an author of the Equal Rights Amendment that was proposed to the Constitution to have, equal rights for men and women in the country. It didn't pass, but, she was the author, and that's her right here on the right. Here's some women. And remember, we talked about in the, I think, previous lecture or the one before, where women were granted the right to vote in the western states of America, right? In the western territories. And in the eastern half, which is this political cartoon, it's like showing these women like, they want the right to vote. They want liberty. So yeah, you're gonna wait a little bit longer. Sorry, ladies. So the assault on parties. So we talked about this in the last lecture as well. I keep referring to these last lectures. But key voting reforms are going to happen at the state level. You have the initiative, which voters could propose legislation, which would be bypassing state legislatures. You have referendum, which is the final approval of laws, have to be approved by voters. You have recall, which voters could be remove elected officials. You have the secret Australian ballot, where no one could see who a voter voted for. And usually at this time, you would tell the political party boss, Tammany Hall, who you were going to vote for, and that was how they did it. So now you see how like the progressive movement is trying to change and progress society a little bit more. And then you also have the direct election of senators finally passed. Instead of state legislatures, it's now it's the people, you and me. And that will be passed in the 17th Amendment. You also have city reformers who are trying to better their cities. They're going to go after saloons, brothels, and political machines. You have a guy named Robert La Follette, whichever way you want to whichever way you want to pronounce it. And he was a governor and a senator from Wisconsin. And he is known for bringing these recall referendum initiative to his state. And from there, it kind of other states start to adopt these initiatives, reforms. So he's also going to pass income state taxes on inheritances, and initiative and referendum were brought to his state, and he will regulate railroads and other industries. But during this progressive era, there was a decline of voter turnout. In 1900, there was 73%. In 1912, there was only 59%. Why the decline? Well, party bosses were less influential, so they're less likely to intimidate you and force you to go vote. So if you don't want to vote, you can vote, or there wouldn't be illegal votes. We all know about that. So this is Robert La Follette, right here on the left. And here you have Arnold Schwarzenegger, who became governor of California, I believe, in 2006. The previous governor, Gray Davis, I remember I was driving home with my dad one day. We were listening to the radio, and Governor Gray Davis was recalled, which opened the door for the Republicanator, the Governator, Arnold Schwarzenegger. See what I did there? Oh, woo. All right. So sources of progressive reform. Many stem from what happened in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, where this company, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, employed mostly women, young girls, and immigrants. They were in a 10-story building, and I believe they were on the 8th floor. The fire started on like the 5th floor or 6th floor, and as you know, heat rises, fire goes up. But this is during the time where, companies are trying to make a profit. So what they do when the workday starts, they would lock the doors for exits. They would lock them so they could get the most out of their workers. If they're forced to work 8 hours until their lunch shift, 6 hours until their lunch shift, well, I'm going to lock them in there for 6 hours. I'll come back, unlock it so they can, go out. So, they were locked from the outside, not the inside, and they couldn't get out. The smoke and gas rise. There are narrow hallways. They're trying to get out, breaking down the doors. Women are jumping from the windows because, hello, that's all they had. And sadly, about 146 workers will die from this fire incident that could have been avoided. All right. And that's the thing. This could have been avoided. And again, this is where the progressive movement is trying to change the way companies, the way cities, the way everything is done. All right. African-American equality was mostly left out of progressive goals. During this time, you have the rise of a man named W.E.B. Du Bois. Remember, it's even though it looks like Du Bois, it's pronounced Du Bois. Unlike Booker T. Washington, his counterpart, Du Bois did not favor accommodation. He did not favor assimilation. And he's going to argue for this talented tenth of African Americans should have full access to education. He's also going to found something called the Niagara Movement in Niagara Falls, Canada, because at the time, you couldn't rent a hotel room in New York City. So they had to cross the border to Niagara Falls, Canada. This movement will turn into the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which will help challenge many racial laws throughout the 20th century. And they are still around today. Another famous reformer for African Americans during this time is a woman, Ida B. Wells. And she was a journalist that was very outspoken against lynchings, and she brought awareness about lynchings in the South to see how grotesque and inhumane this type of death to solely the African-American population in the South. So here you have the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. Up top, you have W.E.B. Du Bois. You have the Niagara movement with the Niagara Falls in the background. And then here's Ida B. Wells. All right, so the crusade for social order and reform, temperance and prohibition. Again, temperance kind of leads into and morphs into the prohibition movement. The reasons, drunk husbands, spousal abuse, and even some bosses are going to argue that, hey, alcoholics don't make good workers because it's going to lead to inefficiency. And this is all about the time of people trying to make that money. Other groups pop up, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, WCTU. During this time, many dry laws will be passed across states and cities. You know, you can't purchase alcohol behind this at this time, or you can't purchase alcohol, period. Transfer alcohol, dry laws, because there's going to be terms for dry and wet. If you are dry laws support prohibition, no alcohol. Wet, you support alcohol, right? This is going to gain prominence prior and during World War I because, you know, our enemies during World War I are the Germans, and they make good beer. So no German beer being consumed in America. And in 1919, the 18th Amendment was passed, which is the legal prohibition and sale, transfer of alcohol, which will be repealed in the 21st Amendment, which repeals prohibition. But I think it was a good 2 years, 3 years. No, I forget how many years it lasted. You can look that up. You can read about it in your book. You also have the eugenics movement, which was the sterilization of certain individuals, the mentally retarded, criminals, mentally unstable. Here you have the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Nice little bow. All right, challenging the capitalist order. Obviously, what happened in Europe is kind of happening here. So socialism is going to become a growing force in the early 20th century. You got to know this guy. He associated with socialism in America, Eugene V. Debs. It's not a Supreme Court case. Eugene Debs, if you want to take out the V, you don't have to write the V in your notes so you don't get confused. He received almost 1 million presidential votes in 1912. He's going to run for president a couple times. But most socialists did not support World War I, and that's going to hurt their cause because, you know, World War I is a big deal in America. Even though it was brief, it kind of goes again, if you're not for the war, you're against being an American. You're not American if you don't support the war. You're going to have the International Workers of the World, and they were called the Wobblies, nicknamed, or the nicknamed I Won't Work because they're going to go on strike a lot. And this union is going to lose its influence because they went on strike a lot during World War I. And the regulation of trusts, many individuals advocated for the distinction between good and bad trusts, and that's going to be seen and depicted under Teddy Roosevelt. So here's Debs on the left, and what is that, Emil Seidel. Okay, Teddy Roosevelt and the modern presidency. So some background on Teddy. He was the vice president for McKinley. He became president in Buffalo after McKinley was assassinated. He was the Secretary of the Treasury. He was a Rough Rider in the Spanish-American War. He did a lot of things. Okay, and here you have this square deal is what he's going to run on. He's going to give America the square deal. Square deal. He's going to focus on conservation, controlling corporations, and consumer protection. So under him, the Sherman Antitrust Act, remember, it was used to break up the Northern Securities Company, which was owned by J.P. Morgan, where it was all these corporations owned by a single man. And this was actually upheld by the Supreme Court. You have the anthracite coal mines in Pennsylvania, and the workers are going to go on strike during this time. And Teddy Roosevelt, remember from the, I forgot. Is it the Sherman Antitrust Act? Where if unions threatened to go on strike, the governments would always side with the owners. Well, this is in reverse. Teddy Roosevelt threatened to seize the mine unless the owners, who weren't willing to negotiated with the workers' union. So virtually all of the presidents sided against unions and strikes. Teddy Roosevelt started that change. You have the Hepburn Act passed in 1906 that expanded the power of the ICC, limiting railroads' availabilities to give free passes. Stop being corrupt, railroads. And then you also have the Pure Food and Drug Act passed in 1906, along in the same year with the passage of the Meat Inspection Act, which created this Pure Food and Drug Act, created the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, which required proper labels and restricted the sale of certain medicines. So it is until this time, 1906, that you don't even know what is in your soda pop, your meat, your processed food. You don't know what's in it. Now you know with the labels. Okay, I know that's a little stretch to say progressing society, but hello, those are big ideas, and this is all in response to Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. So the rise of Teddy Roosevelt, he was a governor of New York, then he was vice president, then he was the president. He acted as a peacemaker in the Russo-Japanese War, and then he was a mighty hunter all the time. Okay, continuing on, he is a big proponent of conservation. If anything, I know Teddy Roosevelt is nicknamed the Trust Buster. However, he also had a great impact on national parks and setting aside land for, parks and forests to not be disrupted by all these corporations that are going to want to chop all these trees down and build housing developments, build stores, build railroads through. Now you're going to have this preservation of land, okay? And this is like the first act of environmentalism, being an environment activist. So he also will pass the Forest Reserve Act. The president can set aside land for forests and parks. You have the Newlands Act of 1902, meaning Washington, D.C. could use money from the sale of land for irrigation projects because, these lands need water. And then there's going to be a panic of 1907, nicknamed the Roosevelt Recession because he kind of caused it. J.P. Morgan, and remember, panics are caused by over-speculation. So J.P. Morgan is going to purchase the Tennessee Coal and Iron Company because the bank that owned it was kind of flaky, and Roosevelt, deeming, oh, this is a good trust, this is a bad trust. All right, JP, I'll let you be. You can go buy it, and that's going to kind of hurt the economy. And later on, this trust will be broken up by Taft. All right, his successor. So here you have Teddy Roosevelt. The troubled successor. So Teddy Roosevelt handpicked his successor, William Howard Taft. He was the former governor of the Philippines. He is the largest president ever, over about 300 pounds. There's a story about him getting stuck in a tub in the White House, so I had to build a new one. He will also become the 10th Supreme Court justice after his presidency. And Taft one day sent a message that read to his Secretary of War, he went on a horse ride today. He said he was feeling good. The Secretary of War replied, how's the horse? And again, it's notable he busted more trusts than Teddy Roosevelt ever did. In his 4 years in office, Teddy Roosevelt was in office for 8, 7.5, whatever. You have the Payne-Aldrich tariff, which Taft and Roosevelt are Republicans. We kind of associate them with the Progressive Party, but they are also Republicans during this time. Remember, Republicans wanted to raise tariff rates, but during this time, they're going to barely lower tariff rates, which made many progressives angry. Taft will fire Teddy Roosevelt's good friend, Gifford Pinchot, who was the head of the Forest Service. That's going to make Teddy Roosevelt very angry. And that trust that was broken up by Taft, JP Morgan's trust, that's going to also make Teddy Roosevelt angry. So Teddy Roosevelt's going to run for president for a third time under the Bull Moose Party. He's going to run on this new nationalism platform, called for an increased federal government powers, favored individual taxation, workers' compensation, and tariff reduction, etc., etc. So here you have, what do you call this? A political cartoon, Teddy Roosevelt handing off his policies to Taft. And here's Gifford Pinchot, his homie. All right, continue on. The Bull Moose Party, Teddy Roosevelt, are going to advocate for women's suffrage. Election of 1912, there are basically two Republicans against each other, which all guaranteed a victory for Woodrow Wilson. And Woodrow Wilson is going to become president in 1913. He was a Democrat, so what does that mean for tariff rates? He wanted to decrease them. Republicans want to raise them. Democrats want to decrease them. And he's going to pass something called the Underwood Tariff. And that's going to coincide with the 16th Amendment, which is a graduated income tax. So now the United States federal government is not going to seek to gain revenue, gain money from tariffs. They're going to gain money from individuals paying taxes. You have the Federal Reserve Act, 1913, was responsible for increasing and decreasing the money supply. Federal Reserve still around today. You have the Clayton Antitrust Act, which essentially gave more power to the Sherman Antitrust Act, which made interlocking directories illegal, meaning the same individuals can't serve as directors on boards of competing firms. JP Morgan was one of them. And it's good to note that the Clayton Antitrust Act made labor unions and agricultural organizations exempt from antitrust prosecution. Remember, the Sherman Antitrust Act was basically set up to go against trust, but they mainly broke up unions. Now, in the Clayton Antitrust Act, unions aren't going to be involved in that. And remember, the Sherman Antitrust Act said lawyers used the words, if they were disrupting trade, they would be prosecuted and broken up, stuff like that. So now labor unions, even though they're going to disrupt trade by going on strike, they can't be broken up now. And Wilson, during his presidency, will not support women's suffrage at first, even though the suffrage amendment, women's suffrage, the 19th Amendment will be passed under Wilson in his presidency. And that's Underwood. All right. Whew. That was a long lecture, people. A lot of stuff, a lot of information. There was, I believe, one of the short answer questions from 2 years ago was about this era, the progressive era. So, or actually, no, I think it was a DBQ. Anyways, progressive era, big time in American history. So you gotta know it. Gotta know it. So hopefully your hand's not hurting too bad. But I try. Okay, I try. So, anyways, if you did like that, smash that like button for me. And as always, stay safe. Wash your hands. Peace.